Good morning and welcome. My name is Erica Perrell, and I'm the Communications Manager with the Atlantic Economic Council. We are very happy to host today's session, The Future of Electricity, a discussion with Atlantic Canada's utility CEOs. Before we officially begin, I'd like to begin by acknowledging while we're gathering virtually this morning, we are all on lands which are the traditional and unceded territory of various First Nations. For the past number of years, we've been doing considerable research on Indigenous communities and businesses and how they can benefit from and advance economic growth opportunities in Atlantic Canada. Our Indigenous research is very important to us. My colleague Fred Bergman released a report just this past July on the significant economic contribution of Atlantic Indigenous businesses and communities. And I'm really excited to share a link to that research, the report, and all of our Indigenous research in the chat in just a moment. I have a couple of really quick notes before I hand the virtual microphone over to my colleague, David. First, we are very excited to join you this morning, but wouldn't be able to do so without the continued help of local business community who continue to support our events. We'd really like to extend a big thank you to today's webinar sponsor, National Bank. I know a number of the team are joining us this morning, so welcome and thank you again. A recording of today's session will be available this afternoon. This will be located on the event webpage. We will send an email to all registrants tomorrow morning, reminding you that it's been posted. Please feel free to share with anybody who you think could benefit from the information. We do have ample time scheduled for questions, so please feel free to write those questions directly into the chat at any time. There's really no need to hold them till the end. My colleague David will help facilitate those questions a little bit later on. I know some of you did submit them at registration, so we do have a copy of those. So we'll probably kick off with those to start. We do have a very short evaluation form that I will post in the chat at the end of the session. We really do appreciate any feedback that you can provide for today's session. So I really do encourage you to take a couple of minutes just to complete that before you head out. When you finish that evaluation, head over to our website. We do have registration now open for our annual Business Outlook Conference. We're going to be physically in person in Halifax, Charlottetown, St. John, New Brunswick, and also St. John's, Newfoundland, a little bit later this fall. Details on all of the locations. We're also hosting a webinar. You can see right there, but all of the details and location information is available on our website. So that's all for me. I promised short and sweet. I would like to welcome my colleague, David Chandy, who is the President and CEO with the Council. He is going to host and moderate today's session. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you very much, Erica, and welcome everyone. And for those of you who know Erica or have seen her around, unfortunately, this is her last day as Communications Manager with the Council. She is moving on to a new position next week, so we will miss her. But thank you, Erica, for hosting today's session. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We're very glad that you could join us, and also to thank all those who've made this research possible through their financial contributions, as well as feedback and input on our work. And a special thank you to National Bank for helping make today's webinar possible. I would also like to acknowledge that the important role played by our members and our patron members. It is this group of organizations that ensures we have an independent research team that not only tracks and understands the region's economy, but that is able to take informed, deeper dives, such as the work we've been doing on this net zero transition. So our members are indeed critical to ensuring we have this research team, and our research funders that you see here for this project allow us to tackle these bigger topics. And so if you like the work that we do, I encourage you to reach out to our Member Relations Manager, Peter McIntosh, to discuss both how you can benefit from and support our work on behalf of this region. As a council, we are trying to focus on the biggest issues facing our region and to be forward-looking wherever possible. And this research on the net zero transition, the opportunities, the challenges, and the risks of this region is a prime example of this work. And several firms and governments have told us how valuable our work so far has been to their own organizations. And so to set the stage for our panel discussion with our special guest this morning, I would like to introduce Lana Assath. Lana is a senior economist with the council and has been leading our work on this topic. And so to set the stage for the discussion with our electricity CEOs, I'd just like Lana to share a few things just to set the stage. So Lana, why don't we begin by why is electricity so important to this net zero transition?
Absolutely. Great question. All right. So, to dig into it, the government of Canada has committed to reduce the country's greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. This goal is part of an international effort to limit global warming. Several provinces have also committed to the 2050 target. In Atlantic Canada, this includes Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Prince Edward Island aims to be the first province to reach net zero with a deadline of 2040. Two central components of the net zero goal include one, increasing non emitting electricity generation, and two, replacing fossil fuel technology with electricity alternatives, a process known as electrification. This means that electrical utilities must reduce fossil fuels in power generation while increasing the supply of clean electricity. Oops. The federal government is driving the electricity transition with major regulatory changes. It has mandated the phase out of conventional coal fired power by 2030 and will be finalizing the clean electricity regulations very soon. It has also implemented non regulatory actions, like investments in tax credits to incentivize cleaner electricity generation. On top of that, provinces have implemented their own actions to move towards cleaner electricity systems. Electricity is an essential input for production, and it's consumed by households and businesses across the country. Ensuring reliability and affordability of power is crucial as we transition to a cleaner, bigger system.
So Lana, you've emphasized the importance of cleaner generation there. So what's the current state of our electricity grids in this region?
All right, well, to answer that question, everyone should be aware that each Atlantic province has their own unique pathway to net zero because of the differences in their existing generation mixes and their options to increase clean generation. A province's generation mix is largely determined by the most available and economical resources. Some of these resources are more carbon intensive than others. This results in a bigger clean electricity transition for certain provinces. Over 98% of Newfoundland and Labrador's and 99% of Prince Edward Island's electricity generation comes from renewable sources as of 2022. However, Prince Edward Island imports over 80% of its energy from New Brunswick. New Brunswick's electricity grid is the most diverse in Atlantic Canada. Almost 65% of its 2022 generation comes from non emitting resources, including the region's only nuclear facility. The remainder is split between coal, natural gas, and other fuels. Nova Scotia generates nearly 25% of its electricity from renewables. Close to 45% of the province's electricity comes from coal. Electricity is Nova Scotia's largest source of emissions, at almost 40% of total emissions in 2022. In New Brunswick, it's the second largest source, at over 25% of total emissions. But to put this into the bigger picture perspective, emissions from Atlantic Canada's electricity sector represent just over 1% of Canada's total emissions. Electricity emissions have declined significantly in each Atlantic province since 2005. Reductions in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick are partly due to large decreases in electricity generation, as well as shifts to greener generation.
So Lana, as we think about the net zero transition for this sector, what are some of the biggest challenges facing the electricity sector in the net zero transition?
So, moving towards net zero electricity and greater electrification comes with many complex and interconnected challenges. The three key challenges in our region are similar to ones that other jurisdictions are facing. However, they each contain aspects that are unique to the Atlantic provinces. And you'll hear more about those aspects from our panelists in a minute. The first challenge is expanding electricity supply to meet expected demand growth. According to the Canada Energy Regulator, our region's annual electricity demand is projected to grow over 60%, or 22 terawatt hours, by 2050. This equates to about another 5 Muskrat Falls. Wind generation is expected to play an important role in meeting future clean electricity needs. So, the second challenge is that utilities must find ways to maintain reliable generation while increasing intermittent renewables. Utilities will be ramping up investments in clean electricity projects due to net zero regulations and greater electricity demand. The cost of these investments and the impacts on power rates are largely uncertain. Therefore, the third challenge is ensuring electricity is affordable for businesses and households during the transition. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Well, that's great, Lana. Thank you for setting the stage. And if you want more details, you can check out the electricity report that we did as part of our Net Zero series, where we've got much more detail on that, as well as other sectors that we've covered in this series. So with that kind of setting the stage for kind of the transition electricity, we have our 4 utility CEOs to join us today. And so I'd like to invite them if they want to turn on their cameras now, and we will engage them in a panel discussion. So first we have Laurie Clark, President and CEO of New Brunswick Power. We also have Peter Gregg, President and CEO of Nova Scotia Power. Gary Murray, President and CEO of Newfoundland Power, and Jason Roberts, President and CEO of Maritime Electric. So welcome to you all, and very glad that you could join us here today. So let's jump straight into our questions here this morning. And Lana talked about electrification of our economy as part of this net zero transition. And so, Gary, we'll maybe start with you for this question. But how much do we need to increase electricity production? And what's the biggest challenge or investment you are facing to increase the supply of clean power? So, Gary, let's start with you on that question. And if we can stop sharing screen, it'd be great. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks, David. Certainly glad to be with you here this morning, as well as Jason, Laurie, Greg, and Lana to have this conversation. You know, if you look at Newfoundland and Labrador's electricity system, you know, we do have one of the cleanest electricity systems in Canada. Today, over 90% of our, electricity comes from renewable sources, largely hydroelectric, as well as a small amount of wind. So we're really in a really good starting point, as Lana outlined, in terms of where we're starting from. If you look at the future, electrification is going to be more and more a part of the electricity system as we move forward. So it is going to be a big part. With that said, growth on the system is not, for us, is fairly modest. I'd say for us, the biggest challenge or the biggest requirement is really going to be around backup generation for our system. Right now, that's really largely due to the pending retirement of our Holyrood thermal plant, which is 500 megawatts. And with that retirement, we kind of have a need to replace that firm energy right here on the island of Newfoundland as well. So that's really going to be a key part of that. So there are currently plans in place for replacement, for new generation on the island, a combination of some hydro, some thermal, quick start thermal generation as well as with a small amount of wind. And that will certainly even help lower our emissions from where they currently are today. And there's a process in front of the regulator currently reviewing that. So make sure that we all do the right review of the projects and we bring forward the best projects to help lower our emissions as we move forward as well.
Peter, what about you in terms of future expected kind of demand on the system and kind of biggest challenge or investment to meet that supply of clean power?
Yeah, sure. When I hear Gary talk about the Newfoundland being blessed with a lot of natural resources in that water, we don't have the same. We do have a hydro system here, but contributes relatively small amounts. So when we look out to 2050, when we think about growth on the system from a electrification point of view, but we're also seeing some population growth in Nova Scotia, we estimate that by 2050 we'll need to have an additional 60% of new capacity, firm capacity on our system by then. Now, so much is changing and so rapidly that is obviously not a firm number, and we've taken to really doing our integrated resource plan. We call it evergreen now, where we would have updated that every 3 to 5 years previously, but the rate of change on the system is so great that we actually are doing that on an annual basis and sort of keeping that evergreen. But really, when you look out to 2050, it's about 60%. The other challenge we've got, and Lana talked about this, is that we do by legislation, we're required to be off coal by 2030 and 80% renewable by 2030. And to put that in context, we're sitting at around 42% renewable right now in the system with our own renewables. We also have the Maritime Link that connects us to Muskrat Falls. That's contributing to our renewables as well. So we're at 42, 43. We need to be by 80 by the end of this decade. So new demand of 60% more by 2050, but we have to replace a whole bunch of current installed thermal capacity with renewables over the balance of this decade as well.
Yeah, so a lot on your plate to keep you up at night and busy during the day with your team.
Absolutely right.
Laurie, what about you in New Brunswick?
So, similar to Gary and similar to Peter, we're experiencing a lot of the same things. I would just add that climate change is also impacting us. We are seeing colder winters and actually warmer summers, and the intensity of the storms and the frequency of the storms is impacting our system as well. Our province is growing quickly, and some of the stats I saw actually said we were one of the fastest growing provinces, and in the Moncton area in particular is where we're seeing significant load growth. Our strategic plan, like Peter indicated, includes our integrated resource plan, and we were seeing load growth at our highest level of the sensitivities that we did in our IRP. So we had a high load sensitivity, and we are seeing our projections surpassing anything that we had indicated for our integrated resource plan. So like Peter, we'll be looking at upgrading our resource plan or updating it on a regular basis to ensure that we're staying current with the numbers that we are seeing. We've got I would just talk about this because it is different than the other Atlantic provinces. One of our assets, which provides most of the renewable energy in the province, or a large portion of the renewable energy in the province, is our Mactaquac Dam. And we have a significant project underway where we'll be making the decision in the next few months around the option for dealing with the alkali aggregate reaction, or AAR, that we have at that dam. That is, our whole system is built around our Mactaquac Dam and 660 megawatts of green energy coming from that location. So the decision on the path forward with Mactaquac is a key one. And obviously, significant costs associated with a project of that magnitude. And doing that while we're also dealing with the 2030 looming deadlines, the 2035 net zero deadlines, and the growing requirement to deal with the load in the province and the climate change. I would say those are the things that are keeping me awake at night and ensuring that we've got the capacity at home to meet the growing load that New Brunswickers need.
Yeah, well, and thank you, Laurie, and thank you just for highlighting kind of what kind of maybe kind of province specific there. So Jason, over to you on the island.
Thanks, David. Good morning, everyone. At risk of sounding a bit like a broken record here, similar circumstance on Prince Edward Island. There is, I'll say, an immediate need to increase electricity production and capacity here on the island. Like the region, we're seeing strong growth in population. strong growth in our load, and that's driven by heat pump programs, conversion from oil to electricity, support for electric vehicles is starting to take on some growth. But we're well on the pathway to net zero. As you mentioned, 2040 is our target here on the island. Last year, about 82% of our energy came from carbon-free resources, so we're in a good spot. I will say adding more renewables here on the island moving forward does face some challenges. First, getting the social license to install more wind farms. We're seeing increasing difficulty there from that aspect. And solar farms as well at utility scale. It requires a lot of land, and that could be difficult to find. But we're committed to adding more renewables. But when we look at our low growth and the extent of the renewables on the system, the intermittency, we also see a need for, as Lori mentioned, some firm capacity here on the island for security of supply. And that's really a strategic focus for us. And we've had some pretty strong signals over the last couple of years, last couple of winters that really tell us that we need to invest in some capacity here on the island. The polar vortex, cold weather here a couple of years ago. We saw the wind farms basically shut down to minimal production. We had to have our generation running here on the island to supply our customers, and as did Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and we were very thankful that they were there at that time. And then this past winter, we are an interconnected utility. We get 80-85% roughly of our supply from New Brunswick, but we experienced some transmission system outages on the lines in New Brunswick that supply our submarine cables. So we lost 3 of our 4 cables at that time, which was a challenge for us. And again, we had to rely on our backup generation here on the island. So with low growth and electrification and increased reliance on our product and our services, for us, we see some reliable dispatchable generation as a priority for us moving forward.
No, well, thank you, Jason. And you can emphasize that need for reliability. And Lana noted, this is especially important as we electrify and kind of more things dependent upon electricity, whether it's homes or cars, and as we add more kind of renewables to the grid that typically are intermittent. So kind of the next question for all of you is around kind of the steps you're taking to maintain that reliable power for both business and household consumers. And Peter, why don't we start with you this time? How do we maintain that reliability? What steps are you taking?
Yeah, I'll sort of address it on 2 levels, David. I think I'll start with transmission level and then move down to distribution level. And so a bit of background, I mentioned that goal requirement for us to be 80% renewable by the end of the decade. What that means for Nova Scotia is that we'll be adding another 1,000 megawatts or so of new onshore wind projects to the system. So we have about 600 megawatts on our system today. Our peak demand, we set a new record 2 winters ago at about 2,400 megawatts. So we've got 600 installed wind and solar now, another 1,000 megawatts of wind by the end of the decade. So 1,600 megawatts on a 2,400 megawatt system. So very, very large penetration of renewables. And to be able to integrate that level of renewables and maintain a reliable grid, we've decided to move forward with 3 grid-scale battery projects. We just actually got approval from our regulator this past summer, and work has begun on the first 2 sites. Very excited about that. So located close to our transmission grid in 3 areas across the province. And again, a total of 150 megawatts of 4-hour duration battery that will help maintain reliability on the transmission system. At the other end on distribution, actually, before I leave that, one of the things I'd like to say is proud to have all 13 Mi'kmaq communities as equity partners in those battery projects. It's the first time we've done that. I've had all 13 and really, really proud of that, and got some significant federal support for those projects too. We got $130 million in grant funding, and also have been able to get very nice low-cost financing from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. But on the distribution level, we've been piloting a number of technologies. The one I'd really highlight is our Smart Grid Nova Scotia project, which is We've piloted with a number of our customers having batteries in their home. And we've done that for the last 3 or 4 years and recently completed a review of the customer experience. And when we've seen, Lori mentioned that more extreme weather that we're seeing across the region, that does result in power outages. And what we're seeing is those people on the pilot are able to ride through those power outages, that the battery storage system can keep them going. So a lot of positive feedback from our customers from that, and we do expect to expand that in the not too distant future.
Well, thank you, Peter. And just to clarify, like when you mentioned kind of the battery projects give you 4 hours, like is that sufficient? Like it just because it doesn't sound very long given some of the outages, in storms. Is that enough to manage the intermittency?
Certainly not in a long storm, like in a hurricane. Obviously, that duration is not there, but the technology really, short duration is really what you're able to achieve with battery technology these days. There are
Yeah.
other more nascent technologies that hope to deal with longer term, but really 4 hour duration is what you can get these days.
Yeah. So Jason, you talked about that intermittency and reliability. What steps are you taking at Maritime Electric to address this issue?
Yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned, the installation of reliable dispatchable generation is certainly a priority for us. But in addition to that, strategic investments in the transmission and distribution system are also needed, both for resiliency and reliability. We're building a system here. Every utility is that runs over a 40, 50-year period, right? Sometimes longer, and with the impacts of climate change, we need to think about what that future looks like. Currently today, we're building the CSA standards, which kind of looks at weather variables and design criteria based on historical data. But one thing that we did was we did a climate change adaptation strategy, which provides insights that will help us adapt our infrastructure to a changing climate for the future. So considering future climate conditions, that's going to allow us to build a more resilient grid that hopefully will withstand the effects of climate change, which we're seeing, as Peter mentioned, extreme events happening more often and more intense. So, one of the things that we've also done is we've been enhancing our vegetation management program. Since 2020, we've doubled our budget for veg management, and we're looking to increase that even further. As part of that, we're working to educate our customers on tree planting, where to plant the trees near our right-of-ways and what those trees should look like. We're also working to widen the right-of-ways where we can get landowner permissions to do so. And the other thing that we're looking at is using satellite technology for vegetation management, risk assessment, and planning activities. So those are some of the things that we're doing, I'll say at the T&D level to focus on reliability.
Barry, what about you?
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'll kind of focus a little bit on the distribution level, I guess, as well. I'd say if you look at our system, if you look at the last decade, we're seeing probably almost double the number of storms in the last decade than we kind of saw in the previous decade. So, we certainly are seeing the effects of that. And, we've always been focused on having a reliable system. And we kind of do that through 3 key principles, making sure that our system is engineered and designed to the right engineering standards. We live in one of the harshest climates here in Newfoundland, in all of North America. So we have to have a strong system. And then making sure that, we build a quality system that is built to strong standards that can withstand those conditions. And then the third component of that is making sure that, we're set up to respond appropriately with the location of our crews throughout the province. And we've supplemented that with automation as well to help us restore power as much as we can. And, kind of like as Jason alluded to, a lot of our system was built in the 60s and 70s. So it's at the point where it needs to be rebuilt. So it's an opportune time right now to kind of future-proof our system going forward, to make sure that we are building a strong, resilient system to factor in climate change and make sure that we have something that is going to withstand that future climate. And, if you look at the utility industry, there's been a lot of innovation, a lot of products that are available today that, decades ago were not available. So making sure that we're taking advantage of the latest technology in automation, information to customers, smart technology to make sure that we can restore power to our customers as quickly as possible, and making sure that we are addressing climate change by reviewing the impacts of the future when it comes to things like coastal erosion, and deciding where we build new plants so that we're putting it in the right location, making the right decisions today.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, guys. So, Laurie, finally, for you on this question, obviously reliability is important, not just for New Brunswick, but to all of Jason's customers in PI also very interested and concerned about that too. So what steps are you taking in New Brunswick?
Yeah, first talk about what we're doing today, and then I'll talk about some of the things we're doing in the future. And I should say it's an and, because everything that's already been said, we are working on. You know, we applied to the Energy and Utilities Board this year for one of the largest rate increases in the organization's history. And a lot of that, those who have followed the hearing would know that it is about investments in our conventional generation that we have to ensure that it is reliable, and also additional investment in our transmission and distribution system. You know, like Gary said, we are using automation and data analytics for us to stage crews in locations where we know storms are going to hit. We also are able to, through analytics, understand the intensity of the storm, what damage we expect to have in a storm, so that we can load trucks and have people available to be on site as quickly as possible after the storm's over and when they can safely do so. So we're using or data analytics to help manage storm impacts as well as recover from storms more quickly. We are also in the process of rolling out smart meters across the province, and from a customer perspective, that allows us to know that a customer is out of power before the customer actually has to call the utility. So we're able to get crews on the road quicker. We're also able to do things like disconnect and reconnect without even having to send a crew out to do that. So much easier for customers who are moving and want service when they need it. We are also putting in an advanced distribution management system, and I would say we're somewhat behind the industry with that, but that will give us better visibility of our own system so that we can deal with challenges on our system before they become problems for customers. Also allows us to deal on the distribution system with the bidirectional flow of energy as we move into renewables and customers choosing renewables behind the meter. So those are things that we're doing right now, and focusing on vegetation in this province is equally important given the amount of trees and impact we have to our system from storms. And I would say, you know, recently we've also seen forest fires and the impact that that's having on our system. Going forward, what's different, I would say, for us is we are exploring new nuclear and looking at small modular reactors as a way to build that capacity that we need to have at home to actually manage the additional renewables that we want to bring on our system by 2035. We recently put out an REOI, request for expression of interest, for renewables in terms of wind, battery, solar, and tidal. I'm happy to say that we're moving along. In particular, I would say the wind REOI is moving faster than some of the others, and the federal government has been helping support that, and like Peter, working with First Nation communities and developers to identify where those wind projects could be and ensuring that they don't have significant upward pressure on rates for New Brunswickers.
Well, thank you. So, Laurie, so Lana had mentioned in her remarks about the role that the federal government is playing in terms of driving a large part of this transition through its regulatory policy. And I know, Peter, you had alluded to that in some of your comments. So what is the most important thing that you want the federal government to understand about electricity systems here in Atlantic Canada? And Peter, maybe we'll start with you on that question. Like, what is it you want the federal government to understand about our context here that may be different than other parts of Canada?
Yeah, it's a great question, David. And you know, regionally, it is different. And I think we've been experiencing that with a lot of the consultations we've been having with the federal government around the clean electricity regulations, that each region will have its own challenges, and we can't look at at those regulations sort of on a national basis without recognizing those regional differences. So that's one of the messages. But what our customers are telling us is their concerns are affordability and reliability. And it's that simple. And I'm sure every one of us on the call has the same experience from our customers. And while they like decarbonization as a concept, they're also telling us they don't want to pay for it. They don't want to pay for it on their electricity bills. And so I guess the main message is that with the requirement to be 80% renewable and off coal, which we fully support, plus net zero 2035, how do we deal with the affordability challenge of that when our customers are saying they can't afford more? So that is the big conundrum. In Nova Scotia, if you look at just simply the requirement to be off coal from a Canadian perspective, 55% of that cost burden for the country lies in Nova Scotia because of our historical reliance on coal, and we're 3% of the national population. So that is a challenge, and we've said to the federal government we need help to make that transition affordable. They have stepped up. I made that reference to the grid scale batteries, but we need more help as well. And so I guess if that's you asked me what the message to the federal government is it's just that our customers we need to ensure that's an affordable transition for them.
Well, thank you, Peter. Laurie, do you want to add to that? In terms of what messages do you want the federal government to hear as they kind of implement and design their regulations that affect this sector?
Yeah, so I would say thank you for the help to date, but like Peter, we need more help. And when I think about the challenge we have in front of us, I think about Air Canada, CN Rail, Trans-Canada Highway. That's the magnitude of the problem we're talking about here. And the federal government was involved in all of those projects in some way. And I do think if we want to meet the guidelines and deadlines that they've got set for us, then it is imperative that they help. In New Brunswick, in particular, we have a very high reliance on electric heat, which drives our peak in our province. We have some of the highest levels of energy poverty in Canada. And again, back to the affordability question, we can't do this alone. And we need to have, I would say, what's also unique in New Brunswick is the fact that while we are 65% non-emitting right now, there's still a long way to go, and we need First Nations working with us. And there are 2 land claims in the province at this point in time, which makes it sort of difficult to work through some of those other challenges, and the overall population of New Brunswick to deal with some of the costs that we're going to see. I will say, I heard something the other day, and I'm going to start using it. We can in the future be reliable, we can be cheap, and we can be clean. But we can't be all of those things. And in fact, we can probably be 2 of those 3 things, but we can't be all 3. So whichever we choose to be, whether it's reliable and clean or cheap and reliable, we need the province to step up and help us with that 3rd component. We need the federal government rather to step up and help us with that 3rd component. So reliable, clean, cheap. You can be 2 of the 3, but you can't be all 3. And so wherever we're headed, we need help with the other item.
Thank you, Laurie. So obviously federal government regulations have been important, but all 4 of you are regulated utilities. You've got provincial regulatory regimes as well as kind of national and kind of maybe international standards as well. So Jason and then maybe to Gary, how does the regulatory system kind of need to evolve as we move through this transition? Because the systems probably were designed many years ago. We weren't in this transition. How do you see that system needing to evolve so that you as a utility can kind of deliver that kind of clean, reliable and affordable power?
Yeah, I mean, I think about Laurie's comment there about reliability, affordability, and decarbonization. Right, traditionally in the past, the regulatory legislative requirements have been sort of least cost reliable service. Right, those 2 parts, and this has often been applied in a very sort of literal, narrow manner, and rightfully so. The regulator has to work within the parameters of their legislative requirements, right? But with government policies, having such an impact on our industry and driving this clean energy transition, which again we're fully aligned with. But I think we also need to be adaptable. We need to find, I think, some innovative approaches or reforms to support efficient regulatory processes, right? Processes that provide pathways for utilities to participate and to partner in clean energy solutions, but also provide a fair and reasonable opportunity to recover those costs related to the clean energy transition, because sometimes it's hard to justify those incremental costs when there are other solutions available. So as Lori mentioned, in today's world, we've got three considerations, right? It's reliability, it's the affordability, and it's the decarbonization policy. So allowing the regulatory system to consider or balance these factors in a way that permits, I'll say, a reasonable pathway towards net zero, a reasonable pace that doesn't sacrifice reliability or significantly compromise the affordability aspect. I think that's probably the next step in the regulatory system's evolution. Not 100% sure how you pack that up, but I think that's probably the next step that we need.
Thank you, Jason. Gary, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, yeah. If you look across Canada, we're all regulated slightly differently, but like as Jason alluded to, there's two key principles, and that have been historical, which is basically least cost and reliability. Last year in 2023, the government of Newfoundland did amend our legislation here, and they added, a third leg to that stool here, and it's under environmental responsibility. So now we have, three things that we're legislated by. It's least cost, reliable service in an environmentally responsible manner. So it has opened the door for proposed projects, that promote net zero and other sustainability initiatives. The environmental responsibility is very broad. It's not really clearly defined in the legislation. So I think now the next step in this is, because there's been no projects proposed under this new requirement yet, is for all of the parties, the regulator, utilities, other stakeholders, to work together to understand is what is going to be, the goalposts around environmental responsibility, as in terms of what types of projects, what types of initiatives will be allowed to meet that threshold, and what is that threshold. So I think we've certainly moved in the right direction, and now it's moving forward with finding out how do we take best advantage of this. Another area I'd say as well that I think that we could help with in terms of regulation is around what we talked a little bit about, innovation and stuff. I think, with the future, with the challenges in the utility sector, I think innovation is going to be a big part of solving a lot of these problems, and making sure that, there's enough flexibility in the regulations to be able to try some of these newer projects. And, they may not always be, a lot of them will be pilots and things like that, but to give utilities more flexibility to propose projects that have the best interest of our customers at the end of the day, and probably the least cost may not always be easy to prove, so just working with them to figure out a way to as well make that work.
Great, thank you, Gary. I'm starting to see a few questions pop in the chat. So we're turning to our last kind of planned question for our CEOs. So if there's questions that you have, I would encourage you to start putting those in the chat, and we will address as many of those as we have time for. But I think, as Lana noted in her introduction, and as all of you have alluded to, the biggest concern for consumers is affordability of power. And people alluded to, we've got some fairly big investments in production or transmission that require significant funding. But I think what people want to know, like, what's this going to mean for my power rates? What's this going to mean for my overall energy costs? And I think that's the biggest question that on people's minds, whether it's households or businesses, as they make their own decisions about how much electricity they're going to be using. So Lori, let's start with you on that question, that whole kind of cost and affordability. What can you tell us about the future cost of electricity for your province?
We do know affordability is a major concern for the customers in the province of New Brunswick, and we are doing everything we can to manage those cost increases. We hired PricewaterhouseCoopers to come in and actually do a review of our organization and determine where we could be more cost effective and efficient. We've got a number of projects underway in the utility, and 2 years ago we made a commitment to reduce our cost by 50 million, and recently close to 27 million in our last application. So we need to show New Brunswickers that we've taken all the steps that we can take to keep rates as low as possible before we pass on any increase to them. The challenge we have is we are under the same cost pressures that New Brunswickers are under in their everyday living for the most part, but on a much larger scale. Everything from fuel to interest costs, all of the things that New Brunswickers are dealing with, we are dealing with too. And we do see that rates are likely to go up. And while we see rates going up, we still have some of the lowest rates in Canada for electricity. But for New Brunswickers, we don't have the lowest bills because of that high penetration of electric heat. So working with New Brunswickers on helping them manage their bills when we're going through cold winter months, and having them working with the utility to ensure that they are managing their payments. And also we have our energy efficiency organization where we work with customers to give them an envelope on their home that will make it as energy efficient as possible. So we have a particular program called the Enhanced Energy Savings Program that provides New Brunswickers who make less than $70,000 as a household the opportunity for heat pumps, air sealing, and insulation in their home to make it energy efficient at zero cost to them. And we have seen a huge uptake and interest in that program, and funding being provided by both the federal and provincial government. But helping those New Brunswickers who are most vulnerable and who are in need deal with the rising cost of electricity is how the utility is dealing with that. But there are certainly a number of challenges on the horizon that we are trying to deal with to mitigate the overall impact of electricity on New Brunswickers.
Thank you, Laurie. So Gary, I know you've had some unique pressures in Newfoundland with the whole Muskrat Falls and rate mitigation. What's the outlook there in your province around kind of cost of electricity?
Yeah, aside from Muskrat Falls, what we're talking about here today with future generation and other things, that still all of that does cause probably a little bit of pressure too, right? So, kind of like Laurie said, everything we're focused on is making sure that affordability is key to everything we do, that we can keep rates as low as possible. We know that customers are very concerned about affordability, about rates, so it is certainly top of mind. And as we alluded to earlier, that it's balancing those three things. It's balancing what we're talking about here: the renewables, reliability, affordability. And when you look at renewables, to just talk about that, the most expensive part of the utility system is that kind of new generation, new transmission. That's kind of tends to be the most expensive part. And we do have some projects proposed here in Newfoundland that won't have an impact on rates until after 2030 or so, and they're currently being reviewed now in front of the regulator. So it's an opportunity, over the next few years or so, to make sure that the projects are vetted appropriately, that the right scrutiny is put on the projects, and that everybody fully understands what is the balance between cost and affordability with the various different options of the projects, and making sure that the right decision is made today that is going to have that impact in the future on customer rates, and everyone is aware of what that impact is going to be, so that it's not a surprise in 5 or 6 years' time. So, I think there's time to work on that and be, with all of the parties, the regulator and utilities and other stakeholders, to ensure that we're making the right decisions today to be in the best place in the future. But affordability will continue to be a challenge, right?
Yeah, thanks, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, our industry has been going through so much change in recent years with electrification, decarbonization, right? It's driving a lot of costs, and quite often a lot of these costs are somewhat out of our control, right? You think about supply chain issues that we had during the pandemic, as I mentioned, with low growth and rebuilding out our system, we're all chasing the same materials and equipment, and that drives costs for all of us. So, we're always kind of searching for opportunities to defer projects where we can, and try to save some money in our operations where we can. We just received $19 million in funding approval from the federal government for our advanced metering for sustainable electrification project, which short is a smart metering project predominantly. So we're always looking for these opportunities where we can have strategic partnerships with our First Nations communities and other community partners, and get access to funding programs for some of these projects around renewables. We'll continue to pursue those where we can as well. I think there's opportunity there because to the extent that you can get this funding, that's funding, that money that our customers don't have to pay, and that certainly helps. So these are some of the things that we're thinking about. And again, we understand the challenges around affordability. Customers, as they're using more of our product, the reliability concerns are growing. So balancing those two aspects are very challenging at times, and we're always looking for ways to reduce our costs where we can, and we'll continue to do that.
Great, thank you, Jason. Peter, last comment for you on this question of future cost of power.
Sure. I'll try not to repeat what my colleague said because everything sounded very familiar to me. But I guess just the general answer to the question is there's a lot of upward pressure. We've got climate change. We've got the extreme weather coming from climate change. We have climate change adaptation. We've got aging assets, a move towards electrification, decarbonization. It's all pressure. And we're not alone, though. It's interesting. I've been doing some research on this recently. You look at Quebec, they've announced recently a $185 billion capital plan over the next 12 years. And they've had a current maximum 3% rate increase written into legislation there. But, 3% is not going to help pay for that $185 billion. You look at Ontario that went through the Green Energy Act a number of years ago, and they've made a decision in Ontario that certain of those costs should be removed from the rate base and put on the tax base. And so what you see there now is that about $6 billion annually is coming from the tax base to subsidize electricity rates in that province. Takes the rate from what would be about 19 cents a kilowatt hour down to about 13 cents. So it's interesting to see everybody sort of struggling with this. And I guess with the pressure being there, I think we need to look at different ways of helping to pay for things like the decarbonization transition. And perhaps it shouldn't all be funded directly out of the rate base. Perhaps there's a role for tax based funding. And the only other thing I'd add is that, with that pressure, I worry most about the most vulnerable in our province. Low-income Nova Scotians who are living, in energy poverty, and we need to do more across the board to make sure that as this cost pressure goes, that we pay attention to them and have tools for them to make sure that we're making their bills as affordable as possible.
Great. Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you to all of you. I think you've certainly highlighted kind of the directions you're going and some of the challenges that you can't necessarily solve alone as utilities. It does require governments, consumers, people providing technology to be all at the table as we kind of work through how do we best and uniquely manage some of those challenges here in the region. I just want to, as we kind of transition to some of the questions, I just wanted to ask about the kind of the regional dimension of this, because you're all dealing with many of the same challenges. There's some unique issues in each one. And I know a year or two ago, there's a lot of interest in kind of, doing something more on the Atlantic basis, the Atlantic Loop and things like that. And I know that's got modified. But as we move forward with some of these similar challenges, is there scope or potential here for kind of more regional type solutions? What would those look like and what would need to happen? And does anyone want to jump in on that aspect? Because we've already got some interconnections between different provinces here, but is there scope and value in doing something, thinking bigger as a region that we could work better together and all our individual provinces? I don't know, Peter, did you want to jump in on that?
I'll jump in. Yeah, I suspect there'll be some different views. I know Lori and I had a conversation earlier this summer in Digby where this question was asked, and I believe our views were a little different. So interested to see Lori's position. I generally feel there is value in greater regional integration. We benefit right now from that submarine cable connecting us to Newfoundland, to Muskrat Falls, helping us meet our renewable energy standard requirements here because we don't have, we're not blessed with a lot of hydro here. We are blessed with wind, and so that's one example of I think where we're moving green electrons from where they're plentiful to where they're not. But I think other parts of the region have benefits too, and I think our province just recently tabled legislation to advance development of offshore wind in Nova Scotia. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like. But there's a great offshore resource there that is much larger than what we're going to need for our own purposes. And so what markets does that wind go to? And I think those types of discussions need to be had on a regional basis. And I personally would like to see more of those discussions happening. I know now on the other side, my obligation is to serve my customers in Nova Scotia. So I can't be creating undue risk for those customers in Nova Scotia. And that is always the challenge, but I am interested in greater regional integration and collaboration.
Laurie, did you want to add anything to that question?
Yeah, Peter, I didn't think we disagreed. I thought we actually
Well, I thought we did.
So,
Good.
and I think Peter's view is actually the same one that I share today. So I don't know if I've gone to his
Oh,
meeting or he's come to mine.
maybe I misheard you, Laurie, but that's great.
I do think there are opportunities for more regional collaboration. And I think as Atlantic Canada, we do a really good job now of working together. You know, we are supplying most of the electricity to PEI, and we are partners and share a lot between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. I think when the big elephant in the room was when we were talking was on the Atlantic Loop, and I think the challenge was the cost at the end of the day of the Atlantic Loop. And as Peter said, the only point that I think until electricity is a regional jurisdiction and not a provincial jurisdiction, it makes it difficult because I have to supply my residents in the province of New Brunswick first. And it would be a very bad day if I had energy leaving the province and I couldn't supply customers in the province of New Brunswick. And so working through what that looks like and the cost of those things, I think is very important. And I have to speak to my regulator and also to my customers in demonstrating that I put New Brunswick's interests first. And so I do believe there's value, and I think we're all stronger together. But until electricity is actually viewed as a regional issue or a federal issue, it's difficult to say that you can't can't put your own province first, I guess would be the challenge. So we have to look at how we can be stronger together. And I think we do a really good job of that. I would also say with Nova Scotia in particular, not beyond electricity, we've looked at a number of cost savings opportunities that have benefited ratepayers in both jurisdictions by procuring things together like poles and wire and transformers and those sorts of things. So that certainly helped in the overall cost of electricity for customers. And I think we will continue to find ways to collaborate where we can show to, as I said, to our customers and to our regulator that we're doing things that are in the best interest of, in my case, New Brunswickers, but also helping the region.
Great. Jason, you made a reference in your remarks earlier about social license. One of the questions is, are we seeing a change in the ease of getting social license for new projects like wind farms or offshore or whatever it is? And how are you trying to then kind of manage that and ensure that we have the capacity to do some of the projects that we're kind of being forced to do or kind of consumers want? How are you kind of developing or managing that social license?
Yeah, I mean, I think the path forward in obtaining social license really is a consultation, right, and discussion. It's no longer reasonable to expect an announcement of a project and we're moving forward without spending a significant amount of valuable time speaking with local residents and community members. It's important, right? Everybody has a voice, and it's taken us across most industries a while to figure out that that's important. So I don't think the social license is gone. I think you just need to navigate it in a way that is transparent and has lots of discussion and open discussion and debate as to the value of these projects and why they need to happen. And I think that's the pathway forward. So for us, we've seen a wind farm project that's been delayed by a couple of years, but it's starting to move forward. Progress is being made. So I think some of the work that we've been doing on some other projects that that we're getting ready to hopefully make an application for, we've spent a lot of time working with our partners and talking these things through. And that's where the value is, I think, in obtaining that social license. So I think there's ways to get there. I just think we need to learn and adapt and be more transparent and proactive.
That's great. We've had a number of comments or questions in the chat just around kind of microgrids or kind of energy, bi-directional metering, kind of net metering, kind of power behind the grid. And I don't think any of you have kind of specifically kind of talked about that, but there's lots of interest among kind of the audience around what role do microgrids, kind of net metering, distributed energy models kind of potentially play. Do you see a role for that? Is that something that you're looking at? Anyone want to jump in and respond on that question?
I can start.
Go ahead, Lori.
I just wanted to make note of a project that we have in the province in Shediac where we're doing all of those things. In fact, it is new for us as a utility, and so having the pilot done in Shediac, and it was a project that we partnered with Nova Scotia Power as well and Siemens on to understand how we use some of these solar power, batteries, thermostats, microgrids, time varying rates, and how we deal with our distribution system as we bring some of these items into our system. And very, very good learning. We're working with the National Research Council as well to get the findings now, and understanding the behavior changes that were made as a result of New Brunswickers having this equipment in their home. And I do see an opportunity. We do have to move in a way that ensures that we can continue to maintain reliable supply for customers and safety, as well as the other key component of this. And having the right visibility on the distribution system through the introduction of our advanced distribution management system is critical for us to be able to do this in a reliable and safe way for New Brunswickers. And cost effective is the other piece of that. But there's certainly a lot of benefits that will come from this, and very happy about the pilot that we're doing in Shediac and looking forward to the results of that pilot.
Great. Gary, you wanted to jump in on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, we do have a net metering policy that's probably been in place I guess, about 7 or 8 years. Hasn't been a huge uptake on it. I would say we probably have 12 to 20 customers that are availing of that net metering function. And it is limited as well under the legislation as to how much of that is available for customers to utilize. And part of it too is, I think, incentives. There's no incentives here in Newfoundland around net metering, solar, those types of things. I know some other jurisdictions do have incentives, and it's a different story there. But when you go back and look at places that done the net metering and what's here, utility scale generally tends to be always cheaper at the end of the day for the customer in terms of best usage of dollars, if you want to put it that way. So there hasn't really been a big uptake, but there's been a lot of lessons learned across North America when it comes to that. But it is a small part of the solution, but the needs out there are so much bigger than what that can fulfill. So really, I think utility scale is the more important component of this.
And I just wanted to ask, I know many of you mentioned kind of moving to smart meters. Do you see greater role for kind of time of day pricing? Is that something that would really help utilities manage kind of peaks and lows in terms of that capacity? Because to me that's the big rationale. I know, Laurie, well, we know when they're gone, but to me that time of day pricing, is that going to leverage a lot? Laurie, I see you nodding. Did you want to jump in on that, or Peter?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Yes, is the short answer. That we do see there being a definite role for time of use pricing. We've also invested in a system, we call it My Energy Insights, that's sort of attached to the smart meter data, which allows our customers through that platform to actually get a better understanding of their usage. I love this system, promote it as much as we can. So it'll show you how much energy you're using. It'll show which components of your house, be it heating or appliances, tips for saving energy. We've now partnered with Efficiency One, the efficiency utility here on the same platform, that is now offering efficiency opportunities for our customers as well. And through that, we also are able to we do have more solar net metering customers as well, who are able to actually look at their system, but also bidirectional meters to feed back into the grid. And that platform through My Energy Insights is able to give them good visibility there. But back to your original question, yes, I think there definitely is a role for more advancement on time of use pricing.
That's great. One of the kind of a couple of questions that have come up, I don't think we've touched on. One is around workforce needs, and obviously there's lots of changes happening in the workforce writ large, but some of you have talked about more automation and more use of technology and kind of changes, new technology systems, new generation systems. On the workforce component, how are your workforce needs changing, or how do you see that changing? So this is just a small change, or do you feel there's going to be a fairly significant change in your workforce requirements for the utility in 2030 to 2050 than what it might have traditionally been? Anyone want to comment on the workforce dimension?
Nobody else does, I will.
I can jump in if you want. For us personally, I don't see a huge challenge there, David. It is changing, but a lot of the skill sets that folks have within the company, I think, are transferable to the newer technology with the right training and everything. So I think that we've kind of got the right skill sets. One thing that will be new in the future, I think, is data analytics. Data is very powerful in the sector, and I think that is probably something we don't fully understand yet, and what the requirements of that are going to be around, and how can we as utilities benefit from data analytics and use data to make better decisions, run our businesses better, have better results for customers. So I'd say that's probably one area where probably is we probably need to figure out more about where that's going to be going to into the future. And I think it does have a lot of opportunity, I would say, for utilities.
Great. One of the
I
questions.
have
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Laurie.
I have a bit of a different perspective on that, so I thought I would share that. I actually see this as a huge challenge for New Brunswick, and the reason I see it as a huge challenge is multifaceted. One is, I would say 20, 25 years ago, we were probably an employer of choice in the province of New Brunswick, and in terms of wages for the linemen and our people who are on the front lines, I don't know that we'll be able to compete going forward in terms of attracting the brightest and the best that we will need to make this transition. The second piece of that, I would say, is, when I think about a meter reader today reading meters, and the meter reader of the future, where we've got a smart meter, it's almost a combination of computer science and meter reading combined in order to do the work on our meters and read meters like we need to in the future. And then the third part of that, I would say, is, we haven't built anything new since the 80s. And so engineers and construction workers and those sorts of skill sets that we need, not just at NB Power, but through the construction phase of the work that we need to do to build out the the system, right from generation to transmission to distribution. I believe we're going to need significant help, and that's only what NB Power is doing. It's not what else is going on in the province of New Brunswick at the time. So, we are starting now. Part of our strategic plan is around a transformer we have that we're calling Thrive. How do we make sure our employees thrive through this transition, and that we're bringing in the brightest and the best, or partnering with people that can help us build out the electricity system that we need and transition it to the grid of the future?
I think there's an important question to come in just around industrial users, and if we want to kind of attract manufacturers, or we want to have big industrial users, whether that's mining or manufacturing, obviously power rates are a key concern for them if that's what they're doing, and especially if they're trying to kind of green and use more green power. So what would the message be, and this is obviously important across the region, but what would the message be to potential investors who may be looking at Atlantic Canada now and seeing this transition and wondering, is this a safe place to go? Are my rates, am I going to have reliable power? Is it going to be clean? Am I going to be able to afford it? Anyone want to respond around, how do we speak to potential investors outside of the region looking at this transition here and what it might mean for them as a major industrial user and obviously a heavy energy user in that case?
I can jump in, David. I think it's imperative, at least from a Nova Scotia perspective, that we do attract more of those industrial users into Nova Scotia. And what we're hearing back from those customers is everything you just mentioned, is that there's a general trend towards green. And so the work we're doing to green our grid is certainly benefiting there. Reliability is key, and that is a challenge for a lot of us because of the more extreme weather we're seeing. But more novel solutions like batteries, microgrids, and all of that can help. And cost of power is obviously the other consideration that they want to talk about. And so it's a challenge because those are all areas where we're struggling with regionally to keep power rates affordable, to maintain reliability. At the same time, we're trying to attract new customers is a challenge, but it's imperative. And we're finally seeing economic growth in Nova Scotia, where that really hadn't happened for a number of decades. And my interest is doing what we can as a utility to continue that economic growth and attracting new customers. I do think about data centers, and that is an active conversation here now too. I think what's really going to drive data centers in this region is probably the access to green energy through wind.
So I think we've got time for one last quick question. It's just on the hydrogen, and maybe Gary, I'll throw this to you because it's particularly in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland where there's potential hydrogen projects that are being considered. How do you see that playing in? What role is a potential hydrogen project going to have in terms of the electricity kind of grid and system in the province?
If you think about hydrogen, it's still a technology that a lot of number of projects that are proposed. None of them are green lit yet to move forward. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops. But as we all know, most of the hydrogen that is being developed in Atlantic Canada is for export to Europe and other locations. So really, what it is going to be, using the wind resources in the province to have a cheap source of electricity to generate the energy to make the hydrogen for export. So the challenge, for utilities is the interconnection with the hydrogen and the demand that they may have on the system. And at the same time, they can bring benefits because you can utilize their wind as well at times of need. So it's something that is more in Newfoundland Labrador Hydro's responsibility with respect to the interconnection for those hydrogen players. But it is something that we don't see as really a benefit to the system here, but it is something that will help the overall provincial economy in terms of providing with our GDP and growth opportunities here in the province, because it is largely for export. I don't know if Peter and him have a different experience there.
Yeah, I'm maybe just going to close it up because I know we're right on time, and I just want to respect your time and everyone else's time. So thank you, all four of you, so much for taking your time to do it. I know you've got lots of issues and challenges on your plate, as you've alluded to, but I think this has been a very important dialogue to hear all four of you kind of discussing this from a provincial and a regional perspective. So thank you to you. I would encourage all our attendees, there will be an evaluation form that will be in the chat. If you could take 30 seconds just to complete that before you sign off, that would certainly be very helpful. Again, thank you to Lana for her remarks and for helping organizing this session today. Again, thank you to all our members, our Net Zero sponsors, as well as National Bank for sponsoring today's session. I encourage you to sign up for our Outlook webinar and around the event, around the region conferences that will be happening. We've certainly got Chief Economists of Deloitte and BMO speaking on our global national webinar. You won't want to miss that. And we'll be providing our provincial economic outlooks for 2025. If you're not familiar with our net zero research, there's lots of reports on our website. Again, encourage you to look at those. And if you're not a member, I certainly encourage you to reach out to Peter or to connect us through our website, and we can discuss how we might be able to serve you and you can help support our work for the region. So again, thank you to all four of you, Laurie, Peter, Gary, and Jason for joining us today. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. This will be posted on our website for those who haven't missed it. Couldn't join us today, but again, thank you and wish you all a very great rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you at a future event very soon. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, David. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.